21 entries, 7 levels. This is an iceberg of the most disturbing banned games. We'll start with the more shocking and discuss games so depraved you'll wonder why they were even made in the first place. Let's begin at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Martha is Dead. Did you know that Martha is Dead was partially censored on PlayStation before its release? From disfigurement of human bodies to self-harm, the game deals with some pretty heavy themes. People have even called it a sad, ghostly story with some horror bits in it. Before we dive into the why, fair warning, there are going to be some spoilers ahead. Set in 1944 Italy during World War II, the game begins with Julia setting up a camera at the lake near her home, when suddenly she spots a dead body floating in the water. As soon as she jumps in the lake, she realizes that the ghostly figure is that of her twin sister, Martha. So, who killed her? Contrary to what you may think, the game is not actually a murder mystery, but something much darker. At its core, the game is about Julia's trauma and familial relationships. In a horrifying twist, it's revealed that it was the twins' mother, Irene, who killed Martha because she mistook her as Julia. But there's more. Before she died, Martha left behind a recording for Julia revealing that she's carrying a child out of wedlock. She feels so ashamed that she's decided to provoke Irene to the point where she'll take her life. And so she did.
I know how much she's made you suffer over the years. Unlike you, I remember all of the harm she has done to you, and it is my fault. Take my place, sister. You will live a better life, and I will be able to rest in peace.
Honestly, it's as confusing as it sounds. Over the course of the game, we see Julia grappling with her sister's mysterious death and acting bizarrely. She even admits to herself that she was doing things that she had never done before. For instance, after Julia finds Martha's body, she assumes her identity, letting everyone believe that she is Martha. She also engages in violent acts, such as harming herself. At one point, when Irene tries to commit Julia to an asylum, she takes her own mother's life and dismembers her body. So, what actually did happen? You see, when Martha was little, she suffered at the hands of her mother. As a coping mechanism, she developed an alternate ego of herself, Julia, who was much more erratic and volatile. So everything that happened, it was all Julia, the manifestation of Martha's repressed trauma. Now, let's talk about the controversy. Remember the PlayStation version? Yeah, it got censored. While the game did not shy away from its graphic content, Sony clearly had an issue with it. There's a face-slicing interactive scene where you are able to control it all, so with every click, you are actively peeling off Martha's face, revealing the flesh and bones. Then there's also a scene involving a pair of scissors and a corpse, and let's just say it does not end well. None of these sequences made it to the PlayStation because of how disturbing they were, so if you're not prepared to confront the game's psychological horrors, it may leave you with more than you bargained for. Level 2. Homefront. If you have ever wondered what it would look like if the United States was ever invaded by another country, Homefront paints a detailed picture for you. The year is 2027, and you're Robert Jacobs, a former helicopter pilot. Through Jacobs' eyes, you witness the brutal reality of life under occupation. The game uses a mix of real and fake footage to create a believable future that feels too real. After Jacobs is arrested by North Korean soldiers, he's thrown onto a bus headed for a prison camp. As the bus rolls through the town, you get a glimpse of the New World Order. People are seen gagged and kneeling on the streets as the soldiers round up civilians and execute them. In an extremely distressing scene, a child is seen crying on the road while his parents are shot in front of him.
Close your eyes!
The boy's screams are so gut-wrenching that for a moment, you completely forget that it's just a piece of fiction. The game only intensifies from there. American citizens are forced into brutal labor camps. At one point, you must hide among corpses in a mass grave. From time to time, you'll also see dead North Koreans hanging with heads impaled on poles. Once the game came out, it drew backlash for a couple of reasons. There was far too much graphic violence against civilians, something that you won't really see in games like Call of Duty. Critics also called the game xenophobic because it showed Koreans as inherently hostile. It was even banned in South Korea, but to be fair, the game was not any more racist than any other first-person shooter game. Russians and Germans have been villainized since the dawn of gaming consoles. So, what was different this time? Unfortunately for Homefront, its 2011 release was poorly timed. At the time, tensions were already high due to North Korea's nuclear weapons program tests, so the idea of a US invasion felt more like fear-mongering than a what if. Instead of drawing on historical events, Homefront seemed like a game made for shock value. And so, in the year 2025, with World War III memes already making rounds on the internet, Homefront's scenario hits differently. Honestly, it's a bit depressing to even think about such a possibility. Alliance of Valiant Arms. Alliance of Valiant Arms lets you step into a gritty, blood-splattered war zone without enlisting in the army or leaving your gaming chair. This free-to-play online FPS dropped back in 2007 courtesy of Red Duck Studios. While it didn't show off next-generation graphics or fancy cinematics, it had one thing in spades: realism. Brutal, unfiltered, sometimes stomach-turning realism. Headshots in the game were incredibly brutal and graphic, with people's heads and limbs flying off on direct hits. It wanted you to feel the chaos of a battlefield, and honestly, it pulled that off a little too well. AVA rewarded strategy, aim, and a little bit of sociopathy because, let's face it, some of the maps were insane. Tight corridors, massive industrial zones, snowy bases, and war-torn cities, it had them all. And then there were the weapons. Not only was there a massive selection of guns, but they were customizable down to the screws. Some people spent more time in the weapon mod screen than they did playing matches. That's how deep it went. Now, let's talk violence, because AVA didn't tiptoe around it. This wasn't your pixelated puff of red when someone got shot. This was blood spurting, bodies jerking back from gunfire, limbs sometimes twitching post-death. There were screams, agonizing death sounds, even bits of gore that lingered a little too long on screen. And that realism, well, it ended up being the game's greatest strength and its biggest controversy. It came at a price, and in China, that price was straight-up banishment. AVA got completely banned because the Chinese government decided it was just too much. They weren't necessarily wrong. Even seasoned FBF players were sometimes taken aback by how brutal the game felt, especially during PvE missions where you'd fight off waves of enemies in close quarters and literally watch bodies pile up. It wasn't for the faint of heart, or kids under 18, though plenty of them played anyway. After a few years of trying to reinvent itself, AVA started slipping. Red Duck ran into trouble, publishers shuffled around, and attempts to reboot or revive the game, like AVA Dog Tag, mostly flopped. The servers slowly went offline, and the player base scattered across newer, shinier shooters. BlazBlue Continuum Shift. If you think anime fighters are all innocent fun, think again. BlazBlue Continuum Shift is so risque that it got banned in the UAE because of its themes and partial nudity. First of all, the female character's design is a major issue here, as they're barely covered and move in a highly suggestive way. Some players even accuse the game of using fan service by exploiting the women with close-up shots and flirty dialogues. You might think critics are reaching, but none of this contributes to the female character's arcs. It feels gratuitous. While the male characters are geared for combat, the girls seem to exist solely for the vibes. Then there's the character of Relius, who creeps out everyone. He seems interesting at first glance, but eventually crosses a line that leaves many players disturbed. As a scientist, he even experiments on his own daughter Ada and transforms her into a robotic puppet named Nirvana. And in case it isn't clear already, Ada did not sign up for any of that stuff. So you certainly won't find Relius on the world's best dad mugs. After Nirvana is essentially reduced to a weapon, her brother Carl later uses her in one of his fights, because apparently that's the only thing she can do now. Once the game came out, some countries had a massive issue with its 3DS cover. The original cover art features a female character revealing more than what was needed. So in the US version, they changed the character positions to cover her up. Did it make the artwork less provocative? Yes. But it also made the cover look a bit cluttered, and people weren't a big fan of that move. Do you think the censorship was justified? Yes or no? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, why not consider subscribing to more content like this? Anyway, let's go to the next level. Level 3. Euphoria. Euphoria is another visual novel video game known for its extremely graphic visuals and explicit language. It was largely criticized and banned because it mixes adult content with characters that are not of legal age. The game follows Keisuke, a young man stuck in a mysterious white room with some girls from his school. None of them remember how they got there, but one thing is clear: they must all play a series of twisted and degrading games if they want to escape. The game? Keisuke must force himself on these characters without their explicit consent. These female characters are assigned the role of a keyhole, while Keisuke's job is to unlock them. That, too, in the most dehumanizing way possible. It's a truly depraved concept. After a point, the constant violence and mind games start to mess with the characters' heads, and honestly, it gets to the player too. It's harrowing to see what people are capable of when they're stripped of all hope and pushed beyond their limits. In Euphoria, consent is nothing but a joke. As the game progresses, you realize that Keisuke is enjoying his role. It wouldn't be a stretch to call him a sadist because he struggles with his tendencies to go too far. He has to actively remind himself that harming others for his own pleasure is wrong. Make of that what you will. Euphoria isn't just about the explicit scenes. It throws in all kinds of fetishes that'll make your stomach churn. Good news is, you can turn off some of the gory bits, but even then, you still have to read all the nasty details and hear exactly what's going on. So no matter how intriguing the story is, it essentially gets buried under the violence and sadomasochism. There are some lines that shouldn't be crossed, and Euphoria's problematic plot basically throws all those lines out of the window. Dead Rising 3. When Dead Rising 3 was released in 2013, its over-the-top violence grabbed everyone's attention. The game is set in Los Perdidos, California, where there's a massive zombie outbreak. The stakes are extremely high. Not only do you need to survive the zombies, but you're desperate to find a way out before the military nukes the place. A core element of Dead Rising 3 is the use of makeshift weapons. It's not just guns and knives, you're wielding things like electric crushers and other lethal weapons where you can literally chop up zombies. For instance, you can combine boxing gloves and nails to make nail gloves. Once you punch zombies, they start bleeding in the most disgusting way possible. If you're still not satisfied, you can simply grab a katana and slice zombies in half. There are also options where you can run over swarms of zombies, splattering them all over the place. Even though the people you're killing are already dead, it still makes your stomach churn. The game also features psychopath enemies who embody the 7 deadly sins. Their violence is often sadistic and disturbing, reflecting their descent into madness. So if you encounter any one of these, it can get pretty intense pretty quick. The sheer number of zombies on screen is a key factor here. It's not just about fighting a few undead, it's about wading through hordes of them. This overwhelming scale of violence is not everyone's cup of tea, which is why it was banned in some regions. In Japan, the game was heavily censored and had reduced gore, fewer zombies, and toned-down blood effects. Germany found the violence exaggerated and banned it completely. The link between violent games and real-world harm would later tragically manifest itself in a different part of the world. In Saudi Arabia, 2 teens participated in the Blue Whale Challenge and took their own lives. And so the game was banned over its potential influence on kids. Whether or not games turn us into violent maniacs is up for debate, but the real question is, why are we so obsessed with all this violence in the first place? Level 4. Phantasmagoria. Originally, a phantasmagoria was an 18th century horror theater known for its frightening, ghostly illusions. Now, imagine that concept as a video game. That's the Phantasmagoria video game. It's a point-and-click adventure where reality and magic get seriously twisted. Before we get into it, spoiler alert, it all begins when Adrian and Dawn shift to a creepy mansion. Adrian starts having crazy nightmares and visions like she's losing it. Things become bleak when Dawn also starts acting strange, and so that's her cue to find out whatever the hell is going on in the house. Turns out the mansion is haunted by an evil spirit who possesses husbands and turns them into homicidal maniacs. The property's previous occupant, Carno, was the reason why his 4 wives died horrible deaths. Phantasmagoria was groundbreaking for its storytelling. The use of full-motion video meant that the game featured real actors and sets, which created a sense of realism that amplified the horror. Every time Adrian had a nightmare or a vision, you could feel the anxiety and dread washing over you as well. There's a particular scene where Adrian is exploring the house and sits on a bed in one of the rooms. Suddenly, hands erupt from the mattress and grab her. She starts panicking but cannot move, as if she's stuck in a sleep paralysis loop. Then Adrian gets these visions where she witnesses Carno's brutality. One wife suffocated, her mouth filled with animal entrails, another impaled with a wine bottle. As Adrian uncovers these horrifying deaths, you begin to fear for her life as well. Meanwhile, Dawn is becoming more erratic with each day. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The sequence was so controversial that the game got banned in many countries. It quickly becomes clear that Dawn is no longer himself, and so one night, he attacks Adrian. Despite her struggles and obvious pain, Dawn does not budge and forces himself on her. It's depressing to see what has become of this once happy couple. Now, Dawn actively hurts Adrian, making the situation quite disturbing. I think that's bad. It actually gets worse. Adrian barely escapes with her life. After a gruesome confrontation with her husband, she ends his life with a brutal axe blow. She then gets chased by a terrifying demon before finally trapping it. Yet, it's the final image that's truly haunting. You see Adrian leaving the mansion, her eyes vacant. A woman who has lost everything. I have no mouth and I must scream. In a future dystopia, your worst fears have come true. An AI, has taken over the world and you are at its mercy. This supercomputer has wiped out humanity except 5 poor souls who are caught up in his revenge plot. He's pissed about his existence because he feels trapped within his own electronic mind. And so fueled by hate and self-loathing, he wants to get back at humans. Since Am cannot destroy himself, he does the next best thing, destroying others. He holds humans hostage and gives them a taste of their own medicine. These 5 people are prisoners of their own minds, living their worst fears again and again. Am chose these individuals specifically for their flaws, trapping them for over a century to endlessly torment them simply because he can. He throws them into horrific scenarios and makes their lives a living hell. The game is considered disturbing because it's not afraid to go to some dark places. We're talking about graphic violence and psychological manipulation where Am becomes totally unhinged. For example, Am turns Benny into a grotesque ape-like creature, and it's implied that one of the characters resorts to cannibalism. He also preys on Ellen's insecurities, driving her insane by warping her physical appearance. In a particularly cruel act, he forces Ellen to face her in an elevator, the very place where she was originally victimized. Basically, Am is a sick entity whose ruthlessness knows no bounds. The game's mature themes drew some heavy criticism initially. People thought it went too far and that it was being violent just for the sake of being violent. It's not the kind of game everyone could stomach, but that's also what made it stand out at the time. Despite the game being a work of fiction, Am's profound understanding of human psychology and his ability to exploit our vulnerabilities comes across as alarming. At a time when our secrets are laid bare online, AI seems to know more about us than we know ourselves. The possibility of such a scenario does not seem like a distant future anymore. Honestly, being wiped off the face of the planet seems more appealing than being trapped in our own bodies. So it really makes you wonder, are your fears of being taken over by AI irrational? Level 5. VTech Rampage. When Ryan Lamborn released VTech Rampage in 2007, it shocked everyone. Let's rewind a little. Just a few weeks before the game's release, there was a real-life tragedy where Sung-Hyo Cho, a tech student, shot 32 people on his campus. Some pundits claim that it was Cho's obsession with violent video games that made him do it, and this was later proven false, as Cho's roommate said he never played video games. While people were still trying to make sense of the horror, out of nowhere, VTech Rampage dropped like a punch to the gut. This game puts you in the role of the shooter, where you walked around a pixelated version of the campus and gunned down students and faculty. For obvious reasons, the controversy was instant and intense. People were outraged. Imagine losing a loved one in such a horrific event and then seeing some developer turn it into a twisted game for shock value. What made it even worse wasn't just the violence. The game had quite a few racial slurs and seemed to glorify the actions of a mass shooter. It was insensitive, exploitative, and disgusting. Politicians and the public called for the game to be removed from the internet. While it wasn't officially banned by any government, it was quickly taken down from its hosting site. Even more disgusting was the creator's response to the backlash. Ryan, the guy behind VTech Rampage, basically made the game for his own amusement to rile people up. When he was criticized, he mocked the news coverage and said they were just as guilty of exploiting the tragedy for views, as if there was no difference between creating awareness and a game where you literally open fire on your schoolmates. Ryan even joked about removing the game for donation money, asking for $2,000 to remove it from his site and $3,000 for a public apology. Basically, he was trolling everyone like it was some kind of a game. It's a no-brainer that Ryan was sick in the head. Capitalizing on trauma should never be normalized, and creators like him need to understand that some things are just not funny. 177. Ever play a game and wonder whose messed up fantasy you're living? That's 177 in a nutshell, if you were gaming back in the 80s. You won't find it easily now, and maybe that's a good thing. The game is named after Article 177 of the Japanese Penal Code, which deals with non-consensual violence. It feels more like a sick joke because the game literally has you committing that offense. 177 is meant as a bishoujo game, meaning that it's an erotic Japanese game with attractive young women. But instead of being a non-violent game, like a dating sim or something, 177 is all about a guy chasing a woman. The objective is to catch the woman and be violent towards her without getting caught by the police. You can throw rocks to slow her down. If she gets to her house, you lose. On the top left corner, you can see the woman's panicked expressions throughout the chase. If you do manage to catch her, the side-scrolling mode shifts to a stationary overview of the entire thing happening. During this, the player must press various buttons in order to please the woman. If you succeed, you'll both be married in no time. Otherwise, you'll be arrested by the police. And honestly, that's what should happen in any case. There are so many things wrong here. The idea that someone can be pleased in such a situation is beyond obscene. And the reward for succeeding is marrying the same person you just attacked? That's just insane. It's hard not to think whoever came up with this idea had some serious issues with women. When the game was first released in the 80s, it was obviously not well received. At that time, there weren't any strict laws to keep children away from such mature content, and so there were concerns that underage kids could easily go and buy the game from their nearest store. Some people got ahead of themselves and created theories. They claimed that the makers of 177 weren't just making a sleazy game, they intentionally put images in it that told players to commit similar acts of violence against women they knew. So basically, the game was designed to encourage real-life attacks. Whether it was a plot or not, the gameplay is extremely disturbing. You don't need a flashing neon sign to tell you what's wrong when the game itself is making you do it. Command and Conquer Generals. Most combat games play it safe by using the same old gameplay mechanics, but Command & Conquer Generals took a gamble, and the fallout was explosive. The game is a spoof on War on Terror, inspired by real-world tensions in the Middle East. So you've got the US, China, and the GLA fighting for global domination. The game leans into the old stereotype where the US has its advanced technology and China has its brute force. And of course, no game is complete without rebels. So we have the GLA, a group of insurgents. Bit cliche, isn't it? If all of this has been done to death, no pun intended, why did Command & Conquer get all the flack? You must have noticed that these action games rarely have any civilians. That's because of rating boards and any potential negative publicity. But not Command & Conquer. The game proudly treated civilians as collateral, and let's just say that it wasn't the best decision. Another thing that backfired was the timing. When Generals came out in 2003, the atmosphere was already tense. The War on Terror was underway, and people didn't appreciate the carpet bombings, anthrax attacks, and self-detonating units. In the GLA's initial mission, they attacked a UN convoy. This particularly felt close to reality. It wasn't just individual players who felt uneasy. Governments too took issue with Generals' depiction of conflict. China thought the game smeared the image of its army, which in the game basically relied on tactics like carpet bombing. Meanwhile, just 2 months after its release, Germany put the game in the list of media harmful to young people as it glorified violent actions. After Germany's strong response, EA decided to create a modified version to reduce the violence. Humans were replaced with cyborgs, bombers were replaced with self-destructing robots. The term was substituted with words like rebels or militia, and blood and gore was completely removed. To be honest, it was quite clever. If there are no human casualties, you can't really complain. But fans were not very excited about playing a heavily censored game. The game also felt a bit over the top with its propaganda. You'd see every other soldier shouting about how their country was totally invincible and would last forever. GLA leaders would talk about holy war and martyrdom. It was just too much for the public. Perhaps future combat games will learn that sometimes less is more. Or maybe they should all just take place in space! Level 6. Special Force, 2003. Special Force isn't just another low-budget shooter lost to the annals of gaming history. It's way more than that. It's a straight-up propaganda tool cooked up by Hezbollah's Central Internet Bureau. Yeah, that Hezbollah. It's designed to immerse players directly into the South Lebanon conflict from the perspective of Hezbollah fighters. The core problem with Special Force isn't just that it's clunky to play, it's that it doesn't care about drawing a line between what's real and what's a game. As you might have guessed, the missions are about fighting Israeli soldiers. Okay, that's one thing, but they also added civilian targets, and that's where things get super messed up and disturbing. It wasn't just generic civilian targets. Allegedly, there were scenarios where players were tasked with attacking civilian buses or even infiltrating and bombing schools as they were Israeli propaganda centers. These weren't presented as morally complex choices, they were simply objectives. The game actively encouraged the player to commit acts that, in reality, would be considered war crimes with no remorse or consequences. But the training mode is where Special Force really turned gritty. Instead of just shooting at a paper target, you're shooting at a picture of the real president or prime minister. The reaction in Western countries was swift and decisive. Special Force faced serious censorship in the UK, Australia, Canada, and Germany, not just because it looked violent, but because they saw it as a harmful propaganda machine and a potential way for a terrorist organization to recruit people. So if you ever come across a copy of Special Force, maybe just leave it where it is. Unless, of course, you're looking for a masterclass in how not to make a video game. Zog's Nightmare. Back in 2006, some members of the neo-Nazi group National Alliance thought it would be a great idea to create a game based on the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory called the Zionist-Occupied Government, or ZOG. If that title doesn't clue you in, buckle up. Zog's Nightmare wasn't trying to be subtle. The game puts you in the boots of a skinhead fighting a dystopia controlled by Jewish people. The enemies are straight out of a propaganda poster, complete with exaggerated features. Basically, all the minorities and anyone seen as a race traitor was in it. The point? Violently overthrow this supposed Jewish cabal. What makes Zog's Nightmare especially twisted is how it tries to sell as self-defense. The game is filled with text and audio claiming white people are victims of a global conspiracy, and that violence against Jews and minorities is the only way to survive. Unsurprisingly, Zog's Nightmare is illegal in a lot of countries with hate speech laws. Germany, for example, doesn't exactly have a high tolerance for anti-Jewish hatred. Owning the game there could land you in serious trouble. Even in the US, where free speech is a bit more flexible, platforms and retailers have labeled it as hate speech. So the game is basically banned in any legitimate marketplace. The fact that Zog's Nightmare exists raises some tough questions. Video games deserve protection as a form of expression, but what happens when that expression is basically a call to violence? Where's the line between a game and incitement? Classified as a hate group by the Anti-Defamation League, the National Alliance wasn't shy about their goals. They saw games as a way to sneak what they called racial truth to young white men when they're not suspecting it. They weren't thinking about art or entertainment, but propaganda. Zog's Nightmare is a harsh reminder that games that exist solely to promote hatred against groups of people aren't just pushing boundaries, they're a threat to the safety and dignity of real people. Level 7. White Law. Back in 2003, someone thought it would be a great idea to release White Law. You get to play as a Klansman with a noble mission, taking back an American city from those pesky racial minorities and Jews. Sound familiar? Yep, we're looking at the creation of the same people behind Zog's Nightmare, the folks who think video games are just itching to be used for spreading hate. The whole thing revolves around the white nationalist fantasy of white genocide. The idea that white people need to get violent to stop themselves from being replaced by other groups. This isn't just a game with some racist bits sprinkled in. It's a recruitment tool designed to make real-world hate crimes seem perfectly normal. The gameplay itself? Let's just say it's not winning any awards. We're talking a basic first-person shooter game with graphics that look like they were ripped from an old CD-ROM. But the content is where it gets truly nasty. Enemies are walking, talking racial stereotypes. Black, Latino, and Jewish people, you'll see them all with exaggerated features. And the walls are covered in white supremacist slogans and calls for violence. Between levels, you get treated to educational segments featuring speeches from big-name white nationalists and neo-Nazis. The game not only tries to frame its violence as fun, but also necessary for racial survival. The purpose is clear: to radicalize players through a combination of gameplay rewards and good old-fashioned propaganda. Like its cousin Zog's Nightmare, White Law is illegal to distribute or even possess in a lot of countries with hate speech laws. Germany, France, Canada, you name it. In the US, it's not technically illegal because of First Amendment protections, but most platforms and retailers classify it as hate speech, which effectively keeps it out of any legitimate channels. What's particularly disturbing about White Law is who it was made for. Most controversial games are geared toward adults, even though kids often get their hands on them. But White Law was specifically marketed to teenagers and young adults by white supremacist groups as a recruitment tool. The National Alliance flat out said that gaming was a way to reach younger potential converts. The fact that such an organization was so comfortable with all this is alarming. If they were comfortable doing this in the open, what else were they hiding? Muslim isn't your typical shoot-'em-up video game. In 2008, when hate crimes against Muslims were seriously spiking, a guy named Eric Vaughn came out with a disgusting Flash game. The gameplay was horrifying. An American soldier had just parachuted into the Middle East and has one objective: to wipe out Muslims. And no, it wasn't about fighting Muslim soldiers, but largely about shooting any Muslim that came on screen. It glorified violence against a whole group of people based on their religion. As the soldier moved around, the target was any Muslim that appeared on screen, and with each click of the mouse, you eliminated them. You'd see men in beards and women in their traditional hijab, and all of them are targets. As the player progressed through levels, they had to first kill Arabs that appeared on screen and later take on Osama bin Laden. It gets to a point where all you can see on your screen are blood splatters. Muslims were basically reduced to a bunch of moving pixels on screen, so it set an extremely harmful precedent. The game didn't just make people uncomfortable, it sparked outrage. Muslim organizations in the UK, Australia, and elsewhere called for its removal and labeled it as tasteless and deeply offensive. Some Arab states even blocked it altogether. Many people were confused as to why someone would come up with such an atrocious idea, but the reason was far simpler. The guy just hated Muslims. If there was any doubt about his intentions, in the words of Vaughn himself, you had to take control of the American hero and wipe out the Muslim race. To make matters even more alarming, the game's promotional ad asked people to download the game now and don't be a liberal. After the backlash, Vaughn did take down the game and left an apology on the website, but he also added that Muslims need to suck it down and stop being offended by everything. Some people even compared it with VTech Rampage, which was created specifically for shock value. But was Vaughn actually ashamed of making something that could promote hate against a religious group? Probably not. He thought the entire thing was funny, so it's a stretch to think that he actually regretted his actions. Active Shooter. In 2018, Active Shooter was pulled from Steam before it was even released. The game simulated school shootings, and you could play as the shooter, a SWAT officer, or even a civilian. The goal depended on the role you chose. So if you were a SWAT team member, your objective would be to protect and extract the civilians. As the shooter, you gain points for each kill. To start, you eliminate the security guard at the entrance after choosing your weapon. Then inside the school, you open fire on the NPCs that are casually walking the corridors. Obviously, the core gameplay was a major problem. The idea of simulating a school shooting was incredibly insensitive, especially since it had been only a few months since the Parkland tragedy. Once news articles and previews were circulated, the game was accused of profiting from victims of school shootings. Survivors and parents of victims immediately came forward and slammed the game. People called it despicable, and petitions were made with over 2 million signatures. Everyone got worried that players would not understand the gravity of what they're interacting with, and so this would only lead to normalizing something so horrendous. After intense backlash, Valve pulled the game. They also kicked the developer and publisher off their platform because of their shady history. Of course, someone who would create something so disturbing likely had questionable ethics. It's baffling that Valve was initially willing to release the game. It only took widespread public outrage for them to recognize how sickening the gameplay was. On the other hand, some people weren't that bothered by it. According to them, the game itself was unimpressive. The NPCs lacked any life, and it was the worst AI they had ever seen. Apparently, if the game was technically bad enough, it didn't matter if it was problematic. Which, in itself, is a problematic thing to say. So, what do you think? Can such games really have detrimental effects on society? Let us know in the comments. If you want to know how unhinged some games can get, check out this Iceberg featuring the most disturbing moments in GTA 5. Yes, that's right, our video on GTA 5 is yet another thing that came out before GTA 6.